Welcome back to another randomised gaming video. I'm Random Gamer Riven, and today I've got a special video as I'm actually going to be playing through some Crucible matches with a low level character. Now I thought I'd do this for a bit of fun because I wanted to see how well I could do with the default gun and a low level character. Now admittedly I have been playing quite a lot of Crucible with other characters, so I'm pretty competent, and as you'll see from my results I actually did very well. So one thing just quickly point out in the bounty tracker here is that it's well worth going into Xander and picking up some bounties from him. Certainly it does depend on how well you play though, because some of the bounties can be extremely hard for the Crucible, so do look at your play style. I would advise against the shotgun and the fusion rifle spree bounties because they are incredibly tricky. Even I rarely do them. Unless you're very good at killing 3 people very quickly with those weapons, it's not worth the hassle of doing them. But do look at what's available and do get a feel for the game. Certainly it does take a little while, but as you can see, here's my default level 7 character, and I'm going to be taking him into the Crucible. And for the laugh, here we go, there's the Kostov 7G02, which is the very first gun in the game. So I'm going to go running around Crucible with this little weapon, see how well I fare, and as you'll see, I do very well. In fact, I won the first match. I was the best player. So as you can see here, the 4 game types. Control is the first one that's unlocked, and in order to unlock the later ones, you have to play a match in each of the various game types. So after you've done one control match, you can then do the next one, and the next one, and the next one. I generally stick to control. Sometimes I do clash. I really dislike rumble, and I also dislike the 3-on-3 team one because that's just quitter central. But I'm not going to talk too much about the match. Instead, I'm going to actually have a quick discussion about playing Crucible at low levels and the various guns that you want to be using if you're playing at low levels, because certain guns, certainly when you have the rare or uncommon versions, aren't that good compared to the legendary or the exotic versions. One thing I should point out is because I'm only level 7, I don't have all my abilities unlocked. Now some of you might say, oh yeah, but that's to be expected, but no, what I mean is that I don't have all the core abilities unlocked. I'm actually playing at a disadvantage here because I don't have all the buffs that you would get. I was checking the other day on one of my other characters, and basically level 14 is where you get the last permanently active ability unlocked. Till then, you're actually at a disadvantage because you're missing some of the perks. So I'm actually at quite a major disadvantage. I'm missing quite a few of the buffed skills when I went into this match, so that gives you an idea of what a disadvantage I'm playing with. Now, interestingly, it's about level 6, level 7 you can get into the Crucible initially, because you have to wait till the Crucible Master on your first account. He will give you your first character I should say on your account, he will give you a invite into the Crucible. Now this usually occurs around level 6, 7 depending on how many missions you've done. But you can't enter the Crucible till you get that invite. For the second and third characters on the same account, however, you don't get that invite, and you can actually enter the Crucible pretty much from the get-go. I think pretty much straight after the first mission, as I recall. So you can actually enter a level 2 or level 3 character into the Crucible if you really fancy for a bit of a laugh. Admittedly, that'll put you at a major disadvantage, but as you can see here, it's certainly possible to win even with the default gun. Now one thing I would actually like to point out is the central character holding the flag, I've worked out, is always the highest member of your team. If you have equal highest members, it's randomly drawn. But I noticed it myself when I was level 30, I was almost always certainly the flag bearer. And then when I checked, because when I originally started I thought it was random, but when I checked, the only times I wasn't the flag bearer was when there was another level 30. So I thought, there's actually a pattern here to this. So that indicates who your highest player is. It doesn't necessarily indicate who your best player is, however. So off I go with the default gun, and as you can see, it's actually quite good at defeating the opposition, even though stat-wise it's not the best gun, and I did get another one that's actually slightly better stat-wise than it. But as you can see here, you can get kills with the default gun, even though it's supposedly rubbish. In fact, the default gun's probably better than quite a few other weapons you can get in the Crucible at this stage. So now I'm going to actually talk a bit about the classes. So if you do fancy having some fun with low levels, and as I should point out there, as you see there, that's not how you throw a blind grenade, but I still managed to defeat the guy. But there are 4 types of course primary weapons: the scout rifle, pulse rifle, auto rifles and hand cannons. Now the good news is some of them are usable. The bad news is some of them at rare and common level are utterly rubbish. Hand cannons at this level are terrible. They are just too weak. If you've got the Last Word and Hawkmoon, which are the exotics, then it's a completely different ball game. But at this level I found them to take 6 to 7 headshots to take down an opponent, and they were incredibly slow shooting as well, to add to the fact they were just painful to use at rare level. They're just not worth using. So at low levels, ditch hand cannons unless you're incredibly good with them, and even then I don't think that they just lack the power at the low levels. Pulse rifles again also lack the damage at this type of level, and I found them to be very ineffective. I found them to be slightly better than hand cannons, but they lack the oomph for this level, and with the low impact often you find yourself rapidly tapping the fire button again and again and again, and if the other player's got shotgun or an auto rifle, they're going to gun you down first. So that leaves auto rifles and scout rifles, which I find at low levels are the best choice. Scout rifles are slightly slower firing but do a lot more damage. You can usually take people down in 5 to 6 hits pretty quickly. Scout rifles usually have quite fast rate of fire, so go for a fast rate of fire, mid-range, medium damage, and you'll pretty much it'll be the ideal weapon for you. Again, auto rifles, even though they've had the subsequent nerfs, the auto rifles are fairly effective at whichever ratio you choose. Just make sure you don't pick a very low damage one. If the auto rifle has incredibly low damage, even though it has a max rate of fire, the damage is just too low. The shot fire rate just doesn't compensate for the low damage since the amount of changes and nerfs, and effectively those guns are rendered useless. So your best bet is just not to use them. I did try a low level gun in another character in the other day, and it was just chipping away so slowly, and the other guy had a slightly different auto rifle. It was only a rare one when I checked, but his one had substantially more damage, less rate of fire, and he took me down a lot quicker. In fact, the low damage rate auto rifles are pretty much useless across the board now. So guns like Dr. Knight with their minimal damage and impact, I should say the impact score is basically their damage ratio, but yeah, if they've got impact that's basically like a wafer thin radius, don't even use them. They're just not going to kill anything. They're just going to take forever to kill anything, and you're just going to die long before you ever kill anything. I mean, even this gun, the default gun I'm using, actually has a higher damage ratio than those guns that I was just mentioning, the low damage ones like Dr. Knight, and this is far more effective. So that goes for your primary weapons. For your secondary weapons, your shotguns, your sniper rifles, your fusion rifles, it does depend slightly on playing style. However, as a general rule, sniper rifles are not good in Destiny. Although they're great for taking players out with headshots, they're just outclassed in that they're not suited to most of the maps. You can possibly snipe a bit on this one, but generally these close quarters maps don't work that well at all. The two that are very good for sniper rifles are, there's one on the moon, First Light I believe it's called, and then there's one on Mars. Both those maps are also vehicle maps, and the sniper rifle suits them down to the ground because you've got large enough areas to hide and shoot. Here you just don't get that. You just do not get that with most of the other maps, and using them at point blank range, someone's going to take you down with an auto rifle or something because you will always be in range of the mid-range weapons in this map. So they're just not worth using. Shotguns are, I find, my weapon of choice. I find them fast, effective and deadly. Just make sure it's got a decent range and a decent impact. If your shotgun's not taking someone down in one hit at point blank range, you don't want to use that shotgun. Even the default shotgun from the first chest I found did take down players at point blank range, so that's the type of shotgun you want, one that just takes down point blank. Admittedly, you do want a bit more range on it because at range you also do more damage, but damage also tightly compensates for range. As the higher the damage, the slightly further the shot will go and the more damage you inflict over the range, while your end zone range will always be a point where you no longer hurt. You'll be doing more damage in the mid to close ranges, which is what you want. Ideally you do want as big as range as possible, but you do want as much damage. If your shotgun's not killing someone at point blank range with a hit, as I said, ditch it, get rid of it. So the other choice is fusion rifles. Now shotguns and fusion rifles I think are pretty much well balanced as a class of weapons. I think it mainly depends on playstyle. If you're going for fusion rifles though, you want a quick charging one that does high damage. You don't want to worry too much about the range. Most do about mid-range, but you don't want a fusion rifle that you need to charge up more than once to kill someone, because then you're in for a really long wait and you're probably going to be dead before you get that second shot out. So you always want a fusion rifle that takes down a player with a single charge, and ideally you want that charge to be as fast as possible. So low damage, you're not too worried about stability because it doesn't matter if it shoots up in the air after you fired it. You've already put the shots forward, the player's dead, so you just got to rebalance and reload. The last thing you want to do is fire one shot, they're still alive, you're then charging, they've got shotgun, you're down. So you do want to make sure. Now, most players, as have been noting, generally use shotguns and fusion rifles as their main weapons in Crucible. That or auto rifles. You don't see pulse rifles. You see quite a few hand cannons since some of the buffs, but and scout rifles. But yeah, pulse rifles seem to be so far the weakest gun that I noticed from the basic sets. Lastly, you have the machine guns and the rocket launchers for your heavy weapons. Now, the machine guns and rocket launchers are both very good. However, the rocket launchers are probably best for rookies because they take anyone out in a single hit. You fire it, you hit them, they're gone. Doesn't matter what rocket launcher you use, they're gone. And the blast radius can also take out multiple people if you've got a big enough blast radius. Now, rocket launchers I find are very much fire and forget weapons. They're great for rookies because you don't need to do much, just hit in the general area and you've taken out the opponent. The only thing you don't want to do is fire one at either point blank range or into a wall, because then you'll kill yourself as well with it. So you do have to bear that in mind. So if that player there, see, is running right next to me, if I was to fire a rocket at him when he was there, I would have killed myself and him. Now, machine guns are by far the best of the two heavy weapons, and they're probably better for the pros. I noticed most of the sort of serious players are all using machine guns, and the reason being is the machine gun is effectively a more deadlier auto rifle, and you can take down players in about 5 or 6 hits because they do a lot more damage than auto rifles. They really are the weapon of choice for streaks. I mean, I've easily seen quite a lot of people get 15 streaks with machine guns. And the other thing is you don't even need that much ammo to take down players. So you've got 100 rounds and you can take down 10 players with just 100 rounds. Because you only need to fire a few shots to take them down. They're that powerful. The only thing you need to do is compensate for the stability. You don't want a machine gun that's up in the air after every shot. Although one thing you can do to compensate for stability is you need to get to learn your gun, but as you use it, press down straight after you start firing so you can compensate for the kickback, so you'll level it after every shot. Different guns require different amount of severity being pressed down on the trigger to, not the trigger, the actual analog stick, to compensate for the aiming, but with the right balance you can easily reset yourself back to default after every shot. It does depend slightly on the gun and the severity you need to press down on the analog stick, but most weapons enable you to semi and auto balance them, provided they don't have an insane kickback. There you go, that's the Rustland, the best around, objectively correct. And yep, I won that match. I was quite proud considering I was only level 7. Although to be fair, I have played an awful lot of Crucible these past few weeks, so I've got pretty decent at them. It does slightly depend on your team. You'll notice there I wasn't actually the highest, didn't have the most kills, but I had more assists. Again, I'm not too fussed about my kill to death ratio. Just as long as you get a steady number of kills. So for the second match, I'm actually just going to have a quick chat about the default exotics in the first game. Now, the Dark Below expansion has just been released as I record this commentary. When I recorded this video, it was actually before the release of the expansion, but today is the day after the release. Commentary I'm recording is the day after the release of the Dark Below expansion. I'm not going to talk about the Dark Below guns, but I am going to talk about the existing exotics, although the way Bungie keep changing things, expect this to be out of date in a few months because they are tinkering perhaps a tad too much with all the guns, and they are changing drastically quite often with every update, and it's becoming a bit of a pain. I must admit, there's a tad too much changing and balancing. It seems like they possibly haven't balanced the guns correctly in the first place, especially after the Vex Midas class nerf that occurred early on. So what I'm just going to do is a quick chat about the default exotics and just sort of say my opinions on them. Now, I haven't actually used all of them, and I will mention those that I haven't used. So certainly exotics depend on playstyle. I find myself, I think the Vex Midas class is the best exotic straight out at the minute. It is insanely powerful. It takes down people with incredible headshots. It has a auto aim function, which not many people realise. It seems to automatically aim for headshots, and it's a dream weapon. It really is. It's rapid fire. For me, it's ideal. It's good to short and medium range. It's not good at close combat compared to a shotgun, but it also has a buff when you kill players, so that way it actually makes taking out multiple players easier, because basically every time you kill someone you get a damage buff, so taking out 2 players is far easier than just taking out 1, and that for me is the best exotic hands down. But just to quickly chat about a few of them, because the balancing keeps changing. So admittedly there has been a recent upgrade in the Dark Below expansion, and I'm interested to see how that goes. However, from the auto rate perspective, there are 3 exotics: Hardlight, Monte Carlo, which is PS3 exclusive, and Cirrus Regime. Now, a lot of people adore the Cirrus Regime and claim it's the best gun in the game. I really like it. I do use it. I don't think it's the best gun in the game. I think my problem with the Cirrus Regime is the first upgrade actually weakens the gun because it gives you a scout rifle style shot, but you actually do more damage per second using the rapid fire when you're shooting via hip than you do the scout rifle shots. Now, I think that's actually a bit of an oversight by Bungie, because the damage ratio per time should be the same whichever mode you're shooting in, but it's not. The rapid fire mode does substantially more damage than the scout rifle mode, which I find is a bit of a disadvantage. It is still a very good gun, and it does hit with a relatively decent power, so you will take players out pretty quickly. It's got a good impact, and it is possibly one of the better, it's certainly one of the better exotics. Now, Monte Carlo I've not used too much in Crucible, but what I have seen, it's a low impact gun and you're going to be using a lot of bullets to take down players. It is, however, great for if you like to do close combat attacks, because it does increase your close combat damage. So if you're someone who does like to do a lot of close combat punches, it's probably a good gun for you, because it does increase your hit damage, and you may well be able to one-hit people if you have the right setup. So I'd certainly advise that if you're going for close combat, and if you don't mind auto rifles. I mean, it's slightly better than standard impact guns, because the exotics generally are, but you have to bear that in mind. You're going to be someone, you need to keep your shots on your target, but it is a rapid fire gun, so it is a basically fire and forget. Hardlight is pretty much the same as Monte Carlo. I've not used it a great deal in Crucible. What I have, it's okay. Again, I would say of the auto rifles, the Cirrus Regime is the best, and I would go for that over the Hardlight and Monte Carlo every time, but both are fairly usable. All 3 guns are worth using Crucible. It just slightly depends on your playing style. Okay, so fusion rifles, there is, in the primary slot, there is the Vex Midas class, which, as I mentioned, it's by far the best gun I found in the game. It suits my playing style down to the ground. I like to stay short to mid range. It's a rapid fire gun, it fires incredibly quickly, it does have auto aim, does a hell of a lot of damage. Its only downside is it runs out of ammo pretty quickly, and I've actually had it run out of ammo quite often on Crucible. I should say, until I got the Vex Midas class, I had not got a 15 kill streak. As soon as I got the Vex Midas class, the first match after I got it, I got a 15 kill streak, and that was when the nerf was in effect. So despite people claiming that it was, I know how badly it was nerfed, but I still find it to be the best gun even with the nerf. With the recent buff, I found it to be an even better gun, so it really is an insanely powerful gun. Okay, Hawkmoon, the Last Word, and the Thorn are the 3 hand cannons. Now, Thorn's recently received a buff, so it's actually... I had someone using it the other day. I mean, it wasn't too bad. One problem I do have with all 3 guns is I actually think the Fatebringer, which is the raid handgun, is actually better than the Hawkmoon, the Last Word, and Thorn. I've not actually got Hawkmoon, but another guy I know who's got Fatebringer has said he prefers using Fatebringer to Hawkmoon because Fatebringer is just fast firing and does so much damage. It's also got a big clip round. Hawkmoon doesn't. The one thing Hawkmoon does have with its various perks is it can one-shot kill in the head. However, it has to be the lucky bullets. Last Word is a fairly decent rapid fire gun, but you have to hip fire it for best effect, which isn't ideal. Thorn, they have increased the damage ability over time, and I did have a guy who was actually the top player was using it. He was just generally very skilled, but I was quite impressed with Thorn after the buff. Till prior to the buff it was a bit weak, but since the buff it's probably actually worth using. I'm not a huge fan of handgun cannons in Crucible, but as I said, certainly consider Fatebringer, but all 3 guns since the relative changes are all very well worth using as your primary weapon if you want to. But again, I would possibly consider taking Fatebringer because that way you can take an exotic in either your secondary or heavy weapon slot. Pulse rifle wise, you have Bad Juju and Red Death. Both Red Death and Bad Juju have both received some buffs in the recent weeks. Red Death, I think, is better than Bad Juju. Bad Juju was the bounty gun and is a bit lacking in damage, which is my only problem. However, it does have an auto rifle fire ability, so it can be used in effect as an auto rifle. It's still pretty decent. Red Death has its perk where it can heal you up as you do damage to the enemies, which is very, very helpful. And I've heard a couple of people say they found it very good for dominating at mid-range because as you're dealing damage to them, you're healing up. And that, to me, is a very, very effective weapon for mid-range. I've seen a few players recommend it on other YouTube videos. I haven't used it too much myself, but I think from what I've seen from the recommendations, it does seem a pretty solid gun.
Enemy captured zone B.
And even I'll admit, if I haven't unlocked the healing perk, but having that healing perk unlocked would be a huge benefit. Okay, Midas Multi-Tools is the only scout rifle, and that's actually pretty decent. Although its damage is not as high as I'd like, it's got what is effectively a hairpin trigger when powered up. Actually, from my experience, I think it shoots faster than the Surus Regime in first-person mode, even with the perk, with the Surus Regime perk. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't shoot as fast as hip firing, but shooting from when you're viewing down the scope is definitely faster with the Midas. It's a very quick fire gun, so it's very, very nasty. It doesn't do a huge amount of damage, but the quick fire compensates. The only thing you've got to bear in mind is you have to trigger finger press with every hit, so your trigger finger will get sore using that gun because you're going to be constantly spamming it, but it's very effective and good range damage. It's a good choice of weapon if you don't have any of the others. In fact, it's probably a good top choice, I must admit. It's one of the better ones. Okay, last but not least in the primary weapon slot is Universal Remote, which is actually a shotgun. If, let's say, you're a shotgun fan and you want to take a fusion rifle, that's ideal for you. I must admit, I would generally stick with shotgun in the... I wouldn't use my primary slot for Universal Remote in Crucible. I prefer having a range and a close range weapon. I think it's purely depending on play style. It's not my preference, but from now I don't actually have Universal Remote, but from what I've seen people using it, it's another. Again, it's relatively good if you want to do close range style. If you want to, as I said, if you want to use a fusion rifle in your secondary shot and use that as your primary, it's pretty decent. It's got fairly decent damage, and again, as all shotguns do, as long as it takes them out point blank range, it's pretty decent. There's not much to say because shotguns I will find are pretty much the same. Basically, as long as they've got high enough damage, which the Universal Remote does, you just one-shot everyone at point-blank range. Although it's not been sold by Xur yet, so I don't see too many people using it. Next up is the secondary weapons. Pocket Infinity is not bad. When it was first released, Pocket Infinity was great, but then it got nerfed really quickly. Since then, I think Plan C is a much better gun. Now, Plan C has been sold 2 weeks in a row as of this week, and it's proven to be very popular in Crucible. I've had my Plan C for quite some time, and it is a very fast charging, with including some of the perks, gun. The only thing I will say of Plan C, and
You neutralized Zone B.
Pocket Infinity is I've had guns that are legendary fusion rifles that I felt were better than both. So that's something to bear in mind. You can get... I have had a legendary fusion rifle which didn't have quite the same clip size, but had a faster charge and almost the same damage as Plan C. And I found that to be very, very nasty. So that's something to bear in mind. You can get legendary rifles as good as Plan C and Pocket Infinity. Okay, Invictus again, shotgun. The Invictus actually is a very fast-firing shotgun. It does the bounties a pain. I have used it in Crucible myself. I found it to be very effective because it's very quick-firing. Even if you miss or just don't finish with your first hit, you can fire a second hit almost immediately. It's a very good gun, well worth using if you like your shotguns. Although I would recommend it's probably worth getting at least 1 or 2 power levels up because the single shot initially doesn't necessarily guarantee to kill unless you're at really, really close range. Okay, Icebreaker, infinite ammo, great if you want to snipe. Again, as I mentioned earlier, sniping is not the deal, so I probably would avoid the Icebreaker at all in Crucible. Again, patience and time. Now, I've seen a couple of people say how wonderful this gun is because it has scope and cloak. The cloak ability is crap because it only cloaks for about 10 or 12 seconds whenever you use it, which actually defeats the point in the cloak ability. I assumed it was permanent whenever you're aiming down the sight. It isn't. You have to aim down the sight, wait about 3 seconds, the cloak then activates and then deactivates after 10. Effectively, it acts the same as a crouching hunter, so I wasn't very impressed with it. I mean, yes, it does the power, but again, as I said, these maps are predominantly, unless you're on the range ones, and the other it's not a very good gun to use, so basically avoid unless you really do like sniping and you're on one of the range maps. Super good advice, as everyone complains, is a little bit too unstable to aim. It's still fairly decent. Again, it's a machine gun, so it's just learning the way how machine guns use. Thunderlord is definitely the better of the 2 machine guns to use, and if you do have Thunderlord, I highly advise you using it. Okay, the rocket launchers. I've got to be quick because I've got a minute left. Gjallarhorn, or Gjallarhorn as I think it's actually pronounced, is got auto-aim and homing rockets. Great. It also clusters, which is brilliant. It's certainly the better of the 2 guns. Truth, because it's only homing rockets, which often hit impact, it's probably not worth using that much. So Truth, avoid, because homing rockets aren't that great. They often hit walls, and it's got decent splash damage, but it's got no like aftershocks like the cluster rockets. Gjallarhorn hits and then has sub-homing rockets as well. So Gjallarhorn is by far the best gun. Truth is probably outclassed by a few normal guns. And that is my wrap up on the exotics.